Most people think being broke means you're lazy. That's one of the biggest lies ever told about money. The truth is, millions of Americans work 2 jobs and still have a negative net worth. So today, we're walking through every single level of wealth, from the absolute bottom to the ultra billionaires, starting with the level nobody wants to talk about. Destitute. This is the floor. Net worth at 0 or below. Not I'm between paychecks broke. We're talking about owing more than you own. Around 37 to 40 million Americans are here right now, and the majority of them have jobs. Here's the thing. Medical debt alone accounts for roughly 66% of all personal bankruptcies in this country. One hospital visit, one $5,000 bill with no insurance. That's all it takes to flip a family from barely surviving into a debt spiral they never climb out of, and the bills don't stop. Between 50 and 70% of income goes straight to housing, food, and utilities before a single dollar touches anything else. Over 2.3 million eviction filings happen every year. The floor isn't unemployment. It's wages that literally cannot outpace costs no matter how many hours you work. But at least these people have nothing left to lose. The next level, they have just enough to make losing it hurt. The working poor. Here's the thing about this tier that nobody wants to say out loud. You have a job, you show up, you work your hours, and the math still doesn't work. About 6.5 million Americans are classified as working poor, meaning they're employed, sometimes full-time, and still fall below the poverty line. Net worth here sits around $2,000 to $5,000, which sounds like a cushion until you realize 73% of people at this level get their entire savings wiped out by a single car repair or dental bill. One bad Tuesday and you're back to zero. Between 35 and 45% of income goes straight to rent. The federal minimum wage hasn't budged since 2009. In a lot of states, working full-time at minimum wage produces a net worth gain of effectively nothing year over year, because wages simply can't outpace the cost of living. But here's where it gets quietly devastating. Average credit card debt in this tier runs $3,000 to $6,000 at 18 to 25% APR. That interest is silently eating whatever tiny gains you manage to scrape together. You're not building wealth, you're running on a treadmill that's slowly speeding up. And the gig economy? 64 million US workers doing rideshare, delivery, and freelance as of 2023. Most of them with zero benefits and zero income stability. You did everything you were told to do, and the reward is treading water. But at least the working poor have a paycheck. The next tier up has something that looks like stability, and that might actually be worse. Working class. This is the tier that tricks everyone. From the outside, working class Americans look like they've figured it out. They've got a car, maybe a house, a steady job, kids in school. 50 to 55 million people in this country sit right here, roughly 30% of the entire workforce, and most of them look completely fine. But here's the thing, they're not. 62% of people in this tier have less than $1,000 in liquid savings. $1,000. That means the car, the house, the job, all of it is a stability illusion. One layoff, one medical emergency, one bad month, and the whole thing collapses within 3 to 6 months. Everything liquidated, back to zero. Home ownership sits around 45 to 55% here, with average property values between $120,000 and $180,000. Retirement savings by age 45, somewhere between $15,000 and $50,000 if they exist at all. And dual incomes aren't a bonus in this tier, they're a requirement. Single income working class households are basically extinct because the math literally demands 2 paychecks just to hold the line. And the anxiety here isn't about today, it's about tomorrow. Automation and outsourcing are structurally shrinking the exact jobs that built this tier into something reliable. The ladder they climbed is getting pulled up behind them, but at least the working class has a ladder. The next tier actually gets to stand on something resembling solid ground. Lower middle class. This is the tier that tricks you into thinking you've made it. Net worth sits between $45,000 and $55,000. Most of that locked up in home equity and a retirement account you've been feeding for years. Household income runs $35,000 to $75,000 annually. At least one spouse has a bachelor's degree. You own a car, maybe 2, with $12,000 to $25,000 in vehicle debt riding shotgun. And here's the thing, this is the first level where you actually have options. A $5,000 emergency doesn't immediately blow up your life. You can start planning for your kids' college. You can breathe a little, but breathing and thriving are 2 very different things. About 45 to 50 million Americans live in this tier, and the overwhelming experience they describe is treading water. Dual incomes, degrees on the wall, doing everything right, and still feeling like you're one bad quarter away from sliding back down. One major job loss, one medical disaster, and that modest net worth evaporates faster than you built it. This is actually the peak anxiety tier. The tiers below this have lower expectations, so the stress hits different. But here, you can see the middle class. You can almost touch it, and that almost is what eats people alive. You have just enough optionality to know exactly what you'd lose. But if you think the pressure eases once you finally cross into the actual middle class, you're in for a surprise. Middle class. This is the tier that every politician talks about but nobody can agree on. Net worth between $100,000 and $500,000. Household income between $100,000 and $200,000, and roughly 130 million Americans sitting right here. That's over half the adult population. Sounds great on paper, but here's the thing. About 60 to 70% of that net worth is locked inside the house you're living in. You can't spend your kitchen. You can't invest your garage. The wealth is real, but it's basically frozen in drywall and property taxes. Now, what makes this tier genuinely different from everything below it is one word: compounding. This is the first level where money starts making money in a way that actually matters. Retirement savings of $150,000 to $400,000 are common. Maxing out employer 401k contributions is standard practice. About 30 to 35% of people here are stacking college savings plans averaging around $25,000 to $35,000. Index fund investing, real estate appreciation, generational wealth building, all of it becomes realistic here with discipline. Home ownership sits at 75 to 80%, with average property values between $250,000 and $400,000. Dual professional or technical careers are the norm. But here's where it gets interesting culturally. Boomers and Gen X built their entire identity around this tier. This was the American dream. Gen Z and millennials look at it and see a finish line that requires a specialized degree in engineering, finance, or healthcare just to reach the starting line. The middle class is still powerful, but if you think this is where the real separation begins, wait until you see what happens one tier above it. Upper middle class. Here's where wealth starts playing tricks on you, because at this level, the money is growing faster than it ever has, and almost nobody can tell from the outside. Upper middle class means a net worth between $500,000 and $1 million. Household income sits around $200,000 to $350,000, and only about 18 to 20 million Americans are here, roughly 7 to 8% of the population. This is not a crowded room. But here's the thing most people miss about this tier: the paycheck stops being the main character. You've got an investment portfolio of $200,000 to $500,000 beyond your primary residence, and that portfolio is quietly doing more heavy lifting than your salary. Asset appreciation and investment returns start outpacing what you actually earn at work. Your net worth is accelerating while your lifestyle looks basically the same as it did 2 tiers ago. Now, most people assume you need a fancy degree to get here, and look, the advanced degree pipeline is real. Doctors, lawyers, MBAs, they're all over this tier, but roughly 40% of people at this level got here through business ownership, not credentials. That's a detail nobody talks about. The funniest part of upper middle class life is the perception gap. Everyone below this tier is absolutely convinced you're rich. Meanwhile, you're looking at your tax bill, which eats 30 to 35% of your gross income between federal, state, and local, and you're thinking, I'm just comfortable. That gap between how the world sees you and how you see yourself is massive, and it never closes. But if you think the identity crisis is bad here, wait until you cross into actual millionaire territory. Millionaire. Here's where the American dream gets awkward, because you did it. You actually hit $1 million, and it might not be enough. There are roughly 22 to 24 million millionaires in the United States right now, and the median age they cross that threshold is somewhere between 53 and 58. That means most people who reach this level spent 25 to 35 years grinding a career to get here. This isn't a young person's club, and the wealth breakdown is surprisingly boring. About 40 to 50% of it is just home equity. Another 35 to 45% sits in investment portfolios. The rest is business or entrepreneurial assets. assets. For 60 to 70% of this group, investment income has actually surpassed their salary. But here's the kicker. $1 million nest egg using a safe withdrawal rate generates roughly $40,000 to $50,000 a year. That's it. $1 million, and you're pulling about half the median household income. Try retiring on that in New York, San Francisco, or basically any major city without drastically changing how you live. You technically made it, and you technically can't stop working. The other myth worth killing is the idea that most millionaires got lucky with some startup or inheritance. 78 to 80% of them built wealth the boring way. Salary plus disciplined investing plus real estate, compounded over decades. No lottery, no IPO, just patience. And the gap within this tier is massive. At 1 million, your portfolio kicks out maybe 50,000 a year. At 5 million, that jumps to 200,000. Same label, completely different life. But if you think the millionaire label carries weight, wait until you see the tier where money actually starts working full-time on your behalf. The multimillionaire, here's where money starts to feel like a completely different game. At $5 to $30 million in net worth, roughly 3 to 3.5 million Americans occupy this tier. And this is the first level where your money genuinely never stops working. We're talking $200,000 to $1.5 million a year in passive income alone from dividends, real estate distributions, and business income. That's more than most households earn while actively working, and it just shows up. But here's the thing, the mentality at this level completely flips. You're no longer building wealth, you're managing it, protecting it. The entire psychology shifts from accumulation to preservation, and that shift brings something nobody expects. More anxiety, not less. Studies consistently show that peak anxiety about wealth adequacy actually hits hardest in this tier. People sitting on $10 million in the bank genuinely stress about whether they have enough. They look up at billionaires and feel small. They describe themselves as comfortable professionals, comfortable with 8 figures. The gap between self-perception and reality at this level is genuinely absurd, and the infrastructure required to maintain this wealth is wild. Professional wealth management is standard here, with advisors charging 0.5 to 1% annually. That means you're paying $25,000 to $300,000 a year just to have someone manage your money. Philanthropy runs at 4 to 6% of net worth, often including nonprofit board positions. You're not just donating anymore, you're governing. These are people in the top fraction of a percent globally who look in the mirror and think, I'm doing okay. Meanwhile, the next tier makes them look like they're playing with pocket change. The high net worth individual. Here's where wealth starts to feel like science fiction. Roughly 100,000 to 150,000 Americans sit in the $30 million to $100 million range, and you've almost certainly never met one. Or, more accurately, you've never met one who told you about it. This tier treats privacy like oxygen. They don't discuss numbers, they don't flaunt, they don't post. The median age is 60 to 70, and most of them built their wealth quietly over decades through entrepreneurship, roughly 60% of them. The other 40% are executives, senior professionals, or inherited wealth recipients who learned early that silence is the best financial strategy. But here's the concept that genuinely breaks people's brains at this level. Your spending no longer affects your trajectory at all. A $100,000 per month lifestyle, which sounds absolutely insane, barely registers as a rounding error against annual investment returns of $1.5 million to $8 million. You could try to spend your way down. You would fail. The number just keeps growing regardless of what you did this week, this month, or this year. Spending and wealth have been completely decoupled, like two trains on separate tracks heading in the same direction at different speeds. So what do you actually think about when money is no longer a constraint? Taxes and legacy. That's it. Wealth infrastructure becomes a full-time operation. Custom trust structures, multiple specialized advisors across tax, legal, investment, and insurance. Family offices become standard. You're not managing money anymore. You're managing a small empire designed to outlive you. And yet, this tier still looks modest compared to what comes next. Because centimillionaires don't just manage wealth, they reshape entire industries with it. The centimillionaire. Here's where wealth stops making sense. sense. You'd think having $100 million means you can buy literally anything you want, whenever you want, no questions asked. And technically, you can, but here's the kicker. You actually can't. Let me explain. There are roughly 28,000 to 35,000 people globally sitting at $100 million or more in net worth, and about 38% of them are in the United States. Almost all of them are either founders of successful companies or C-suite executives who spent decades climbing to the top. Average age? Somewhere between 62 and 72. Annual passive income ranges from $5 million to over $50 million. Multiple properties, full household staff, serious philanthropic commitments, and still more money left over than they could realistically spend in a lifetime. Sounds like infinite freedom, right? But here's where it gets complicated. Most of that wealth is locked up. We're talking private equity stakes, operating businesses, real estate trusts, complex financial structures that look incredible on paper but can't be turned into cash without months of legal work, tax consequences, and structural headaches. The headline number says $500 million. The actual liquid cash available might be a fraction of that, and just managing this wealth is a full-time operation. A private family office with 5 to 15 employees is standard at this level. Accountants, lawyers, tax strategists, investment managers, all running $2 million to $5 million a year in operating costs. Your money literally needs its own business just to function. The funniest part? Most centimillionaires still describe themselves as self-made business people. Not ultra-elite, not obscenely wealthy, just hardworking entrepreneurs who did well. At $500 million. But if you think this tier sounds complicated, wait until you see what happens when the number hits 10 figures. The billionaire. Here's where the numbers stop making sense. Not because they're wrong, but because they're basically fictional. There are roughly 800 billionaires in the United States, around 2,700 worldwide, sitting on a combined $14 to $16 trillion. And about 70% of them are self-made. Built a company, scaled it, rode the equity to 10 figures. But here's the thing, nobody understands about billionaires. The money isn't real, not in any practical sense. Billionaire wealth is almost always trapped in a single asset. One company, one stock. Elon Musk's net worth has historically been around 72% Tesla. That means when headlines say he's worth $200 billion, what they actually mean is he owns a massive chunk of a company that the market currently values at a price that would give him $200 billion if he sold, but he can't sell. Dumping that much equity would crater the stock price and cost him control of the company. So the number on the screen is real and also completely untouchable. So how do billionaires actually fund their lives? They borrow against their shares. Take out massive loans using equity as collateral. The bank gives them hundreds of millions in cash. They never sell a single share, and because loans aren't income, they pay virtually zero in taxes on it. Effective tax rates at this level range anywhere from near 0% to around 20%, depending entirely on how the money is structured. W-2 income is irrelevant. Capital gains, dividends, and qualified business deductions do all the heavy lifting, and over half of Americans see billionaire wealth as a threat to democracy. Yet research consistently ties billionaire wealth creation to technological disruption and first-mover advantage rather than pure extraction. Whether that justifies the outcome is a debate nobody has won yet, and probably never will. But billionaires aren't even the final tier, because above them sits a group so small, so absurdly wealthy, that the difference between a billionaire and what comes next is like comparing a millionaire to someone with pocket change. The ultra-billionaire. There are roughly 20 to 25 people on the entire planet who have crossed the $100 billion mark. That's it. The most exclusive club in human history, and you could fit every member in a single restaurant. Elon Musk has peaked around 210 to 230 billion. Bernard Arnault sits around 200 billion. Bezos hovers near 190 billion. About 50 to 60% of them are American. And here's the thing that breaks most people's brains. The difference between 100 billion and $200 billion is absolutely nothing. Not in any way that matters to a human life. Both numbers are so so incomprehensibly large that the distinction exists purely on a leaderboard that only 20 people are watching. Their wealth fluctuates by $10 to $50 billion based on market sentiment alone. A bad Tuesday can erase $15 billion. A good earnings call adds it back. None of it changes what they eat for breakfast. None of it changes a single thing about their Tuesday. And contrary to what you'd expect, these are arguably the least free people on the planet. Every government wants a piece of them. Every regulatory body is watching. Every political cycle turns them into either a hero or a villain, depending on which way the wind blows. 40% of the public admires them, 55% actively criticizes them, and 65 to 75% of Americans support some form of wealth cap or taxation targeting this exact tier. Economists can't even agree on whether that's real policy or just populist noise. But here's the real punchline of this entire video. Somewhere around the billionaire mark, wealth stopped being about freedom. It became about legacy, power, numbers on a screen that no human being will ever actually spend. The retired millionaire playing golf at 60 with zero obligations and zero public scrutiny is, by almost every meaningful measure, more free than the richest person alive. That's the joke. The highest level of wealth in human history, and the prize is a number that means nothing and a life that belongs to everyone except you. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.